So like I said, we have that formula down on how to take pixels and put it into a flexible unit. And we're going to try to take this a step further and work on making a flexible grid using those same concepts we went over. So let's pretend that the graphic designer at the company where you're working has sent you a mock-up and you're tasked with coding it. And I have a picture of here of the mock-up where in Photoshop here you have a background on the main page, and then you have this section in the middle here which is a blog, has a title, here's the actual post, and then here are some other posts that you might be able to click to, so like some related articles. So we're going to mock this up in HTML. I took the time and did the basic styling, like setting colors and background colors and images and basically all the styling that is not layout. And so I have those completed in our project, and so you'll be able to see that just to save a little bit of time and let us focus on actually making the layout. So here I can show you that real quick. If I jump over here, I have the index set up here. You just have a number of paragraphs and some blog previews, which are displaying like this right now because I haven't floated anything. I have a title and a header, and without a lot of styling it's going to look like this. Alright, so if we look at our mockup, when you get something like this from a designer, you might have these widths set in pixels. So we'll pretend that we do. Say this whole page here is a certain number of pixels, and you'd be able to see that. So I'm going to actually enable, this is a grid, and I'll disable the background so you can see it a little bit better. But in your book, a few weeks ago, you read a chapter where it talked about grid-based layouts and how you can use them to have really good alignment and lay out where things should go in your page. So in this case, we're going to be using a 12-column grid layout. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can see them all here. And the text really lines up on these grids here. So you have this little sidebar, which has a good left alignment here, and the main content, which has an alignment here. So if you think about your web page as being from the left of this grid here to the right hand side, and that should include everything that we want in our page. And then this right in here is our actual blog post. So for the sake of this, we'll pretend that this whole page from left to right, which is like the max that your content is going to take up. I'm not talking about the whole browser width. This could still be displayed in the browser. Like if I put this background back on, you can see this can, if you scale this could get really big, but for the most part the main content is going to be in this section. So we'll say that from the left side of the grid to the right side of the grid, we'll say that is 960 pixels, where each of these columns are 69 pixels across with a 12 pixel gutter in between these. So remember, these are called gutters, and that adds up to 960 pixels total. We'll say that from here to here is 900 pixels, so that would leave about a 30 pixel margin on either side of the actual blog. And then if we look at the actual columns in here, we'll say that from here over, this left hand side is going to be 566 pixels, and over here this one is going to be 331 pixels. Alright, so now that we have those numbers, we can start working on our CSS. First thing I'm going to do is put in my little box sizing, just to make layouts not awful. Okay. Side note, I'm using CSS variables here. This is just a way where you can make variables and assign them a value, and then you could use them elsewhere in your project. So if you haven't seen those anywhere yet, they're very easy to use. That's specifically how you do it here. I can go over that if you have questions, but in case you saw that and you were wondering what was going on, I'm just using some variables. Okay, so if our whole page, this dot page here with the class page on it, is the whole place where content can go, and we said, remember, the whole page is 960 pixels wide. I can go ahead here and do width 960 pixels. Alright, so if I save this, I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see it, and refresh. So now you can see the page has been limited to 960 pixels wide. The mockup also is centered. Put that back on there. It's centered, so we want to do that. And if you remember from centering, you could do margin 0 auto. What this would do is set the top and bottom margin. Remember, this is a shortcut for top, bottom, left, or top, right, bottom, left in that order. So if you do 2, this will cover the top and the bottom margin, and the second one will cover the left and right. So let's say on our page we want a 36 pixel top margin, and then the left to right we want it to be automatically centered. Save that. Alright, so now this is our 36 pixels on the top and the bottom, and we're centered on the page. That might be a bit much. That's a little better. Okay. Next, we want to start in on the actual blog. Alright, so here's our blog, and we could do excuse me, a width. Remember, the width of the actual blog is 900 pixels. Okay. On the header, we're going to stick some padding in there because this is right up against it, and remember, we don't ever want that. So we'll just do 24 pixels all around. Okay, got our 24 pixels. We want to add that same pixel. Here, I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to add that same pixel here so we have that strict alignment from our Photoshop, if you remember. Doesn't exactly match the same amount, but it's close enough. So that is on our main, which we don't have any styles for yet. So jump in here. We'll do padding, 24 pixels, top and bottom, and then 0. And remember, the width of this, I said, was 560 pixels. I think we'll just put 24 pixels all around. Okay. That looks a little better. So now we got this good alignment here. It's no longer enough space for that one to display. Okay. And then for the aside, we want to do something similar, and the width of that is going to be 331 pixels. Again, these numbers, they would be with that mock-up that you get, so I'm not just making them up. I mean, I guess I am, but you know. And then we'll do 24 pixels and 0, just so it has padding on the top and the bottom, but not on the sides, and I'll refresh this. Okay, so now we have them at least showing up there. Okay, now we want them to get up on the correct layout. So float, you can add a float on here, and on the aside, you can have a float right. Okay, so now you got them up on there, but we have a problem. Our background went away because of having 2 floated items. So remember the trick for that, we have to add that overflow property to the blog. So overflow auto, and then I'm going to refresh. So I'll add the overflow property, and now if I refresh, we have our mockup. It is completely hard-coded, all set with pixels, so if I make this bigger and smaller, this is not a good, here, let me show you in the actual browser. Here it is in the actual browser. This is probably better than that preview one since it's having some issues. But if I make this smaller, you can see it's still centering there, so that's cool. But once I get to smaller than it should be, it just cuts off. So it's not very flexible. It's not responsive. It's not adapting to the screen size. And so that's going to be our next step. I also realized, because I didn't set the padding there, this is smack up against each other, so let's fix that real quick. See how that looks. There, okay, now we've got some better gutters in there. Now we're going to go from fixed to flexible, so let's start getting rid of some of those pixels. So the blog is 900 pixels. We want to set it to something a little more proportional to the page. Alright, so first we can start by setting a flexible width on the page. So if we go to our CSS here, and our page right now it's set to 960 pixels. Again, this is super inflexible, so we can try setting a percentage width here. And so we're kind of setting the max width of the browser that all of your content can take up. So you can just play around with something here. I'm going to start out and try something like 80%. I'll comment that out. If I refresh this, that's pretty close. So now the page is going to take up 80% there. We need to do something on the blog here where I realized I had that twice. Margin 0 auto, that'll get the blog centered in the here. Okay, so now it's going to take up 90% of the page, and now we can move on to the actual blog. So if our whole page is 80% here, the next thing we want to get rid of is this fixed 900% width on the blog. So we can use our target context formula now that we have a context set to a relative position, this 80% here. So if we think back to our target divided by context here, if we do our target, we know is 900 divided by what's our context. What is, according to that Photoshop mockup, what is the width of this? It should be about 960 proportionally here. So if I do 900 divided by 960, so we'll get a crazy number here, which I'm just going to paste it in. I guess it's not too bad. There. And so if I want to show this as a percentage, I can change this to 93.75%. Okay, so now proportionally this blog is going to take up the same percentage of the page, except it's expressed as a percentage. So I'll save that, refresh. Alright, so now it's going to take up a little bit more space. Okay, next we want to start thinking about our columns. Our columns are still fixed width, so this one's still really small over here, this one's still really small over here. So let's go to our main. This one is 566, so we can do our target is 566. And so what is our context? Up here our context was 960, but our context changed. The main is inside this blog, whose width is intended to be proportionally 900. So our context is now 900 pixels. And when you do the math there, you get, you can use a calculator for this, this crazy number here. So we don't want to use that. We want to convert this to a percentage here, which is 62. Okay, alright, so we have our main, and then let's jump down to our side. Same deal here. Our target is 331 pixels, and our context is 900 pixels. Again, this is just showing you how to proportionally change a fixed layout into a fluid one. Okay, so that's what you would get there, and put this in here as a percentage. Okay, and then let's jump over here and refresh. Alright, so now we're back proportionally it's looking like it was before. I mean, the same pixel width is not there, but proportionally these are lined up. And so just like that, we have a flexible base layout. So you remember when I resized this before, the content would be covered up. Now if I do it, it's keeping its proportion. It matches what's on the mock-up. And this is one of the major ingredients of responsive web design, is just having the ability to do these flexible grid-based layouts. And we've done some practice with this when we've done floats and our fluid layouts, but this is a more calculated approach to it. Alright, so you could call it there, but we still want to get rid of some other stuff like these little pixels. We want to try to avoid using pixels at all in our designs if possible. We have a lot of flexible units that are easier to manage, so let's jump into getting rid of some of these pixels. Alright, so let's look at this main one here. So the main, the aside, and I think the header, yeah, they all have a 24 pixel padding. So we're going to switch that out. First thing we're going to do is, right now this is doing 24 pixels the whole way around. We're going to change this so that the top and the bottom uses a flexible layout of M. And we talked about what M is, so it's more flexible than pixels. And so this is going to be the top and the bottom padding. Over here we have the left and the right. And this left and the right one we care about in terms of our layout and coming up with our percentage of the whole width, so we can use our formula here to convert that 24 pixels to something more scalable. So our target is 24, and our context again is still 900 pixels. And when you do that, you're going to get there we go. So it's going to be 0.02666, lots of sixes. Here, I'll just put it in here. And then I just put it over here. Okay, so I can copy and paste this to where these two are. Alright, so all I did was make my my padding a flexible unit in addition to the height and the top and bottom padding as well. So go back here, refresh. So now if I do this, the paddings around here are going to also proportionally change, so they're no longer going to be hard-coded to that number of pixels. And then I can look on my page, we also have some pixels here. I can make that one M2. A lot of this is just trying it and seeing what looks right. I could make that 2M, you know. Alright, so for the most part, we've gotten rid of all of our pixels and we've landed at a page that is fairly responsive to the touch. It's not a fully responsive layout yet until you add in the next two ingredients, which we're going to go on to next. We need to start breaking our habit of translating pixels from Photoshop directly into CSS, like I did here, and we want to focus more on thinking about the proportions behind our design and understanding how the element is in relation to its container. So it would have been easier by far if I said this whole thing was 90%, this was 60%, this was 40%, and you didn't have to deal with all of those conversions. So start thinking in percentages and the EM unit, and try to avoid using pixels wherever you can now going forward. So that's it for this, and let me know if you have any questions.